Another very lovely evening to all of you. Once again, my friends, thank you all for joining me. We left off in our last Bible study in Judges 6 with the call of Gideon. And now we're picking up in Judges 7. I'm sure that all of you have heard about the movie 300. You've probably seen it if you know a little bit about Leonidas and the Spartans back then. It's based roughly the movie very, very loosely based on the actual events of the 300 Spartans that stood against the Persians. But what most people do not realize is how the 300 Spartans were actually a almost kind of a backup force to a larger army made up of 1,100 other warriors from other Greek states. But tonight you're going to be hearing about an actual army of solely 300, to which we pick up in Judges 7:1. Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. If you'll recall in the previous chapter, Jerubbaal, which is Gideon's, that's what they call him now, this had now, Jameson Fawcett Brown said, this had now become Gideon's honorable surname, meaning, and they translated it, the enemy of Baal, which is very fitting for this cause, because the reason why the Lord allowed the Midianites to invade Israel is because of their worship of Baal, and Gideon was the only one in whom stood against Baal. But Gideon is not the only person in the Bible mentioned to have more than one name. Charles Ellicott noted Abraham, Sarah, Jacob, Joseph, Esther, Daniel, Paul, other instances of scriptural characters who had two names. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. One would do well to note the opposition, the sheer numbers that Gideon is going to be fighting against. This would have been absolutely petrifying to see. Pretty close revealing of what was stacked up against them in the movie 300. It's that kind of army, just waves of them. Joseph Benson said the army consisted of 32,000 men, talking about Gideon's army right here. A small army in comparison of what Israel might have raised on so great an occasion, and a very small one in comparison with that which the Midianites had now brought into the field. Gideon doubtless was ready to think they were too few, but God comes to him and tells him they were too many. Man, being prone to attribute everything to natural causes rather than to God, it is one great design of God in all his dispensations to counteract this evil disposition in our nature which robs God of his glory, and to cause us to consider him. So this victory, you would have to say, and I've done this in my own life, as I'm certain that any of you other Christians have, well, that had to have been God. I've said that, I can't even tell you how many times I've said that in my own life. Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down into the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. Now here is a rather peculiar instance where the Lord is going to be bringing these 10,000 down to the waters, and how they partake of the water is the choosing of them. John Gill said, I will try them for thee there, or purge them as silver is purged from dross. So the word signifies, as Kimchi observes, the righteous, now listen, the righteous from the wicked, as he thinks. Now this is a theory. who with others suppose that by those who bowed on their knees to drink, meaning they actually got down on their knees and like a dog lapped up the water, these were the ones, those in whom did that like a dog, were the ones rejected. And bowed on their knees to drink were such as had been used to bow the knee to Baal. Now, it's a clever theory. So he brought down the people into the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. He's talking about separating the two. Put one group on over here and the other group over here. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go every man into his place. So the people took victuals in their hand, and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man into his tent, meaning back into his place, and retained those 300 men. And the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. John Gill makes another nice observation. It appears that these 300 that were ordered to stay and go with Gideon were unarmed men, at least could carry no arms in their hands. Their hands were full. For in one hand they carried their victuals, which would be these pots, and that's how they held the food. Victuals is food. And these pots would later contain lamps, and they carried their victuals, and in the other hand their trumpets, so that the salvation wrought by them would most clearly appear to be of the Lord. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, arise, get thee down into the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host. So the Lord knows that Gideon is very fearful, and of course he's fearful. This is impossible odds to our earthly senses, just absolutely crushingly impossible seeming. And thou shalt hear what they say, the Lord says, and afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down into the host. Then went he down with Phurah his servant unto the outside of the armed men that were in the host. So the Lord's telling Gideon, you'll hear what they think. What Gideon is unaware of is how the Lord is setting the fear of him. The fame of him is already coming to the camp, much like that of Joshua and Moses before they ever met their enemies. So the Lord is already building this fear within the camp of the Midianites. And I think that Adam Clarke is pretty on point with his observation of what he thinks was made up the whole of the Midianite army. The vast multitudes of Midianites, which came merely for plunder, were wholly unarmed, he says. And I would say so. There's well over 100,000 of them. But they had a guard of armed men, as all the caravans have, and those guards were on the outside of the multitudes. It was to these that Gideon and his servant came. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude. Once again, grasshoppers were always a representation of locust, like a plague. There's so many of them. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came into a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it that the tent lay along. Now what's he talking about? This man says that he just sees this piece of barley bread roll into one of their tents, like they have set up right here, and smote the tent that it fell, and overturned it that the tent lay along. Doesn't seem like it makes much sense to you and me until you know the history behind it. Pulpit Commentary said, the commonest kind of bread, the food of only the poorer classes, talking about this barley bread, indicating therefore the humble origin and station of Gideon. The words at the end of the verse are heaped up to indicate the total and entire upsetting and overthrow of the tent, symbolic of the root and destruction of the Midianite host. So the Lord is sending dreams to these soldiers and telling them that they're all about to. I'm certain that they were frightening dreams, even though it seems very simple. They automatically know what is being signified. Alexander McLaren noted the coincidences which brought Gideon to just that tent among the thousands along the valley at just the moment when the two startled sleepers were talking might well strike Gideon as they did as being God's own fulfillment of the promise that what they say would strengthen his hands for the attack. And his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the man of Israel, for into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. So even the man's comrade, his fellow soldier within the Midianite army, he said, this has got to be, you can just tell there's probably angels at work right here. Of course the Lord is doing this. Pulpit once again commented, the presentiment that God had delivered Midian into Gideon's hand is exactly like the terror in the minds of the Canaanites which preceded the arrival of Joshua at Jericho and such. You'll remember that. And it was so when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof that he worshipped, and returned unto the host of Israel, and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. It's very striking how it says, and the interpretation thereof, and then the Bible itself notes how Gideon worshipped right after. I'd say that was just such a relief. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers that the food was in, the victuals before, and lamps within the pitchers. Okay, so lamps are going within these pitchers. And Matthew Henry really brings something out of this verse. This method of defeating the Midianites may be alluded to as exemplifying the destruction of the devil's kingdom in the world. By the preaching of the everlasting gospel, the sounding that trumpet, and the holding forth that light out of earthen vessels, like the clay pots that they're using. For such are the ministers of the gospel. And Gideon said unto them, Look on me, and do likewise, and behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with a trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Matthew Poole wrote, Gideon mentions God in the first and chief place, and himself only as his minister, but from prudent policy, because his name was grown formidable to the Midianites, and so was likely to further his design and their flight as it did. They already feared God, and they feared Gideon. So Gideon says, blow this trumpet, surround them, blow these trumpets right into the midst of the valley, and start screaming out, this is for God, and this is for Gideon. And terror would just consume them as it does. So Gideon, he separates them into 3 different groups. He leads one of the groups. There are 100 men per group. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, and they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. Okay, so it says in the middle watch, and they had just established this middle watch. We'll come to this right here in a second. And they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers so that the light would shine that were in their hands. Charles Ellicott said, The Jews anciently divided the night from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., this 12 hours, into 3 watches. At the beginning of the middle watch, in essence, soon after 10 o'clock at night, as we would know about 10 o'clock, would be the time at which the host would be buried in their first sleep. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. This is a shock and awe type of tactic. It's forcing this all at once. And this camp is already in a bit of terror before they ever even show up. This would have certainly have erupted that. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. Once again, pulpit commentary. This had the effect of awakening the whole camp simultaneously, and they started to their feet and ran hither and thither in confusion, shouting as they went. Undisciplined troops, they make a really good note right here. Undisciplined troops, especially excitable ones, are very liable to be thus thrown into a panic. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Bethshita, and in Zererath, and to the border of Abel Meholah, unto Tebeth. And I believe that just as it usually is within these armies, because it's the Midianites, the Amalekites, it's not just the Midianites. This is... from what I gather, several tribes coming in at once, making up this great army coming against Israel. So they probably there was probably already dissension among them before this night had ever occurred. They're already scared. Now they're terrified. They're probably bumping into one another, and they probably hate one another so much anyway that they turn the swords on one another. They start slaughtering one another. There's no reason for Gideon and his men to even have swords at this point, because they're going insane. The Midianites roused suddenly from sleep, Cambridge said. The Midianites roused suddenly from sleep, gave the alarm, believing themselves to be completely surrounded, encumbered by their tents and cattle. They turn their swords against one another, and the flight becomes general. And if you wish to see just how reckless and careless people are, just watch videos of Black Friday shopping. I mean, people die from being trampled by hordes of people, and whom have very, very few numbers compared to the numbers right here in such a closed up area. And as I said, a lot of them are probably not very friendly to one another as it is. They're worried for their life. They're trying to escape. This panic is to the peak, and terror is peaked, and it's at night, so they don't really see one another. So they could think that some of these are Gideon's men that they're fighting against. Who knows? And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali and out of Asher and out of all Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. The other tribes, they join in after this, because word quickly spreads. And then, as you see, the Midianites and them, they're fleeing down through here along the Jordan. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters unto Bethbara and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, and took the waters unto Bethbara and Jordan. And as one can tell right here, how the Midianites are trying to make their escape and go back home to the east. But Gideon, he continues pursuing them, and Ephraim comes down and helps. And they took, speaking of Ephraim, the two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb, and they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. Benson said Oreb and Zeb had probably taken shelter, the one in the rock, Oreb, and the other by a winepress, Zeb, but the places of their shelter were made the places of their slaughter, and the memory of it preserved in the names of the places. Eliphaz said the capture of these two powerful leaders was the result of the second part of the battle, and was not accomplished without a terrible slaughter. The completeness of the victory is also alluded to in Isaiah 9:4. Thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, as in the day of Midian. The brief narrative of Judges perhaps hardly enables us to realize the three acts of this great tragedy of Midianite slaughter at Gilboa, the fords, and Karkor, which we will be coming to in the next study. But my friends, that is it for tonight's study. I do ever so thank you all for joining me. I hope that you all learned something. This is one of the most amazing victories in the history of man. I thank you all for joining me. God, peace be with you all. Amen.